Hello, my name is Brian Long, and this is the persuasive speech for Columns 542. My instructor is Dr. Cook. Sorry for saying Dr. Elliott last time. And this speech is on the need for discipleship training in our churches. First and foremost, Jesus called the church to discipleship. Dallas Willard has said, since making disciples is the main task of the church, every church ought to be able to answer these questions. What is our plan for making disciples of Jesus? Is our plan working? By the results in our world and in many of our churches today, I would say the answer to that is no for many churches. How will the church be judged to whether it is an effective church or not? Ultimately, each church will be evaluated by only one thing: its disciples. Your church is only as good as its disciples. It does not matter how good your preaching programs are or property are. If your disciples are passive, needy, consumerist, and not moving in the direction radical obedience, your church is not good. And we see today that many of the same problems that exist within our church exist externally too, in our environment, our social cultural environment, which means the culture has invaded the church and not vice versa. Why discipleship? Because being a Christian is a journey. It simply is not just saying yes to Jesus Christ. It takes a journey. It is a lifestyle. And we must remember that Jesus established some principles of discipleship to help us on that journey. Matthew 16:24 says, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Luke 14:27 says, and whoever does not bear the cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. There are sermon examples that I found of the call to a life of discipleship. You can find plenty of occasions mentioned in the Bible where Jesus challenged people to make serious commitments, not half-hearted ones. Leave your life behind, pick up the cross, like in Matthew 16:24. And he still wants us to do the same. We must be willing to pay the cost of discipleship. That's from To Be a Disciple by Dr. J. Cook. Discipleship is a mandate for us as a Christ follower. We do not have a choice. His kingdom must be built on solid biblical principles that assure every new believer solid foundation. After all, a believer is someone who believes in Jesus. He may or may not attend church regularly. He may or may not study the Bible, pray, give tithes and offerings, and so on. He may or may not have said a prayer asking Jesus to save him. A believer simply believes in Jesus, but may or may not have allowed Jesus to transform him. So tricky to determine whether or not a believer is truly saved. After all, Satan believes in Jesus too. However, a disciple is someone who is fully committed to obeying Jesus in every part of his life. That is important. Every part of our life. Jesus is not a part of his life. Jesus is his life. Disciple means learner. And in New Testament days, a disciple gave up everything in order to follow his master. A disciple is what Jesus calls us to become. The Great Commission is a call to discipleship. Matthew 28, 18 through 20, we all know as the Great Commission. Before his ascension, when Jesus ascended, climbed, went upward, his body ascended to heaven, Jesus gave these practical directives, orders, commands, directions for the church, which were essentially for us to spread the gospel. The command was to disciple and make disciples. The Great Commission is being part of a call to discipleship. Was God's primary plan for the church is to make disciples. Discipleship is the primary thrust of the Great Commission. Greek word for disciple equals mathetes, means learner, pupil, someone who learns by following. Apprenticeship, we see those in today's society, where someone follows someone around and learns a job. Well, today we need to find a mature person in the church when we are a new believer who we can look up to, who we can follow, who can disciple us in the ways of Jesus. Christ wants to use all of his body, the church, in the disciple making process. Realize it takes all types of Christians to reach all types of people. None of us are at the same exact place in our walk with God. And so there will always be someone who we can look up to and someone who we can reach down to and pull up to a new level of maturity through discipleship. The heart of the church. This is what should be in every chest of a born-again Christian. God's primary plan for the church is for disciples of Jesus to develop other men and women into disciples. There is probably no other more primary matter of negligence in the church today than our failure to follow the Lord's command to develop disciples. Because of this gross neglect, many Christians think themselves as an audience to be entertained rather than an army ready to march. Discipleship must function at the heart of the church ministry. Bill Holt, New Century Discipleship Making. So we need to decide, are we a follower or are we a disciple? Gospel Luke. It is possible to be a follower of Jesus without being a disciple, to be a camp follower without being a soldier of the King, to be a hanger-on in some great work without pulling one's weight. Once someone says, talking to a great scholar about a younger man, he said, "So and so tells me that he was one of your students." The teacher answered devastatingly, "He may have attended my lectures, but he was not one of my students." There's a world of difference between attending lectures and being a student. It is one of the supreme handicaps of the church that in the church there are many distant followers of Jesus and so few real disciples. Swindoll's ultimate book of illustrations and quotes. I hope, Dr. Cook, that I will be a communications disciple of yours and not just a follower. Thank you. Shane.